Good morning. Happy Monday. It's the last week of school. Today, I am reading a portion of a book about Thomas Jefferson. Remember, he's the third president of the United States. Very, very interesting fellow. This is about how he grew up and all the things he did. It is by Dennis Brindell Frayden, illustrated by John O'Brien. Who was Thomas Jefferson? Thomas Jefferson is pictured on our nickels. He's also portrayed on a giant sculpture. That means they carved through the rock of his picture and some other pictures. That's in Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. The Jefferson Memorial is a popular landmark in Washington, D.C. It's a building built to honor him. Also, Jefferson City, Missouri is the capital of Missouri, and that's named after him. Mount Jefferson in Oregon is another place that's named after him. Here's a little drawing of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. Why is Thomas Jefferson honored in all of these ways? Well, you know that he wrote the Declaration of Independence. This is the paper that said, "We don't want anything to do with you, Great Britain. We are tired of you telling us what to do." We've talked about this several times, right? That was from 1776, a very long time ago. The words, and we've talked about this as well, the words, "all men are created equal," has inspired people for over 200 years. Now, Jefferson was a giant in many fields. We already know that he was the third president, as I just said. He was a gifted architect. That means he designed buildings. He designed Virginia's State House and the University of Virginia campus. That's a college. People called him Mr. Mammoth because he collected prehistoric bones. I did not know that. His book collection became part of what started the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress is in Washington, D.C. It's a huge, huge, huge library. Every book that's ever been published is in the Library of Congress. Can you imagine how many books that is? Despite his many public triumphs, Jefferson's private life was often sad. His wife died when she was only 33. He only had 2 children that lived to be grown-ups. He always felt guilty that he didn't live by his own words. The man who wrote "all men are created equal" had slaves, lots of slaves. And toward the end of his life, he didn't have any money. He didn't save money. He didn't use his money wisely. And he owed a lot of people a lot of money. But this is the true story of a man with many sides. Well, let's learn. Oh, I didn't show you. This is a drawing of the Declaration of Independence. There we go. Chapter 1. Thomas Jefferson was born in 1743 on his family's plantation. Plantation is a huge farm. It was called Shadwell in central Virginia. Virginia was one of the 13 colonies belonging to Great Britain. By the calendar used then, his birthday was April 2nd, but today's calendar, his birthday is April 13th. That's very curious to me. Now, he was the third of 10 children. Now, little is known about his mom, Jane Randolph Jefferson. Far more is known about his dad. Peter Jefferson, his dad, was a prosperous, that means he made a lot of money, farmer who had dozens. 12 is 1 dozen. Get a dozen donuts, that's 12. So he had dozens, so he had lots of slaves. He was also a surveyor, a person who measures land boundaries. And let me show you this picture before we move on. This is a drawing. These are the colonies, 13 colonies, and here is Virginia. These are all states now, but back then they were not. His dad also served in Virginia's legislature. He helped make laws. Now, young Thomas thought his dad was the smartest and strongest man on earth. It is said that Peter Jefferson once raised 2 barrels of tobacco, because a lot of plantations grew tobacco. He raised 2 barrels that had been lying on their sides to an upright position. They said each of those barrels weighed about 1,000 pounds. Oh, that's pretty strong. He also loved books, and he read Shakespeare and other authors in his spare time. Shakespeare is a famous author from Great Britain, lots of plays and so forth that he has written. Tom had cousins named Randolph who lived in Eastern Virginia. And before I move on, let me show you this drawing here. This is Virginia. This is Shadwell, where he lived. And in just a second, I'll tell you more about Tuckahoe. So it's not too terribly far apart. Not far apart at all by now because we have cars. But remember, they did not have cars back then. Let's read on. Now, the cousins were named Randolph. Those are his mother's cousins because her name before she got married was Randolph. Now, they lived in Eastern Virginia. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Randolph died. And after that, Tom's parents helped raise the 3 Randolph children. Tom's first memory was of moving to his cousin's home about 50 miles away. So it'd take a long time in a horse and buggy. He was about 2 then. For much of his childhood, Tom went back and forth between the 2 places. Sometimes he was home at Shadwell. Other times he was at Tuckahoe, the Randolph estate. In a way, Tom had the best of 2 worlds. At Shadwell, which stood on the edge of the wilderness, his father taught him to ride a horse, swim, fish, and hunt. When he was at Tuckahoe, he went to dances and learned to dress and behave like a proper gentleman, like what they did back then. He didn't get along with his cousins. Now, he had a cousin who's also named Tom, was 2 years older, and it looks like he probably was a bully to Tom. When Tom Jefferson was 9, someone else took charge of the cousins, and most of the Jefferson family moved back to Shadwell. But to his disappointment, when his family went home in 1752, he didn't go home. He was sent to study with a preacher named Reverend William Douglas near Tuckahoe. So he didn't even get to go home. The Reverend Douglas taught Tom languages like Latin, Greek, and French. Tom studied and lived with Reverend Douglas for 5 years. The only time he returned to Shadwell was for vacations. Although this schoolwork often bored him, he liked to read on his own. Sometimes he would be so wrapped up in his books that he read for 15 hours straight. Now, you know that Mrs. Reader's told you many times, if you want to be smart, what do? You read. That's what you do. You read. I'll show these pictures in just a moment. Young Tom loved music. He practiced his violin for 3 hours a day. That's a lot of music practice. If you want to be good at anything, at something, what do? You practice. You want to be a good reader? You practice. You want to be a great basketball player? You practice. You want to be a great musician? You practice your instrument for a long, long, long time. You practice and practice and practice. By age 13, Tom was very tall and thin, and he had red hair and freckles on his face. He ended up, when he was grown, to be 6'2". That's about as tall as my son, so quite a bit taller than Mrs. Frieder. Now, he was way taller than the average man back there. Excuse me, the average man was shorter than Mrs. Frieder. So he seemed like a giant because he was very tall. In fact, he had a nickname called Tall Tom. Let me show you this picture. There he is studying with the Reverend preacher. There he's practicing his violin, and there is a drawing of him being, when he's tall and thin. Now, when he was home for the summer in 1757, his dad became ill. Peter Jefferson died that August. Tom was only 14, and he was very, very sad to lose his dad because his dad was his hero. Now, Tom was the oldest son, and he inherited, that means it was his. He inherited much of his father's estate, including about 2,500 acres of land. That's a lot of land. And he inherited about 30 slaves. But he wasn't to receive the bulk of his inheritance until he turned 21. Tommy is wanting to sit up here by me. So now, Peter Jefferson had wanted Tom to go to college. So to prepare for it, he lived and studied with another minister, another preacher, for 2 more years. He didn't like this preacher much either, but at least he was now close enough to Shadwell to spend weekends at home. By 1760, tall Tom was 16 and eager to begin college. And here there's a picture of his dad, sick. And I'm guessing this is probably Tom right here. So we are learning about Lewis and Clark and how they explored. Let me show you some things first. On my little tiny map. Okay, remember this is Appalachian Mountains. This line right here that I drew with my pencil, can you see that? There we go. That is the Mississippi River. This kind of loop right here through some states, those are the Rocky Mountains. Do you see all these states here with the little star? Those are the Great Plains, including Oklahoma and Texas and some others. Now let me see. This line right, it's hard to see backward because when I'm looking at my video, it's backwards. So here, this is the Mississippi River. So this is Missouri, and this line goes through here and up and around. That is the Missouri River. That's important to our story. You see New Orleans down here. Okay, let's look at our vocab for today. Fascinated. Say fascinated. You are very interested or attracted to something. Here's our example sentence. The puppy was fascinated by the squirrels in the park. Have you ever been fascinated by something? I'm fascinated about how Thomas Jefferson was. He's very, very interesting to me. So I'm fascinated by his life. Guided. Guided means led by something or someone. Here's our example sentence. The dog guided the lost children back to their home. Guided. Okay. Honored. I'm honored. That's treated and thought of with respect, held in high regard and thought of as important. I am honored. Okay. Here's our example sentence. The kind man was honored at a special ceremony for his generosity to the school. Okay, generosity means that you have given, typically given something, not necessarily money. Okay, honored. I'm honored that you would think so highly of me. Prairie is our last one. Prairie. That's a flat land with grass and not very many trees. Here's our example sentence. The grass on the prairie waved as the wind blew. I told you in a video several days ago that I went to the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve about an hour north of where I live. And prairie, there's nothing. There are some fences back there. They didn't have any fence anywhere. And it's just grass and some wildflowers and some bison. We saw some cows too. Prairie. Okay, hardly any trees at all. Okay, now as a review, we already learned about the 3 tasks. There we go. There we go. That's a sign language 3. It's easier for me. The 3 tasks that Lewis and Clark had to do, that Thomas Jefferson wanted them to do. 1, remember, he wanted them to collect animals and plants. The second one, make friends with Native Americans. And the third one, find an all-water route to the Pacific Ocean. So they started out over here, and this is the Pacific Ocean right here. They were trying to find a way to go find an all-water, so they didn't have to walk. They could just go by water. Think about that. Let me pull that a little bit closer. Okay. Now, your job, you remember you always have a purpose for listening. Your job is to find out which one did they have trouble completing? Which job? Was it collecting animals and plants, making friends with Native Americans, or finding an all-water route? Okay, think about this when you read, when you listen to the read aloud, and I will see you tomorrow. Remember, I love you. Bye.